Naoto is yet another excellently written Persona character. As you guys know, I'm a huge fan of Persona 4, just because it's just such a great game. Not only is the gameplay good, but it does an amazing job coming up with characters that you actually, well, care about, that you can actually relate to, you can understand their frustration, their suffering, their pain, but they also just kind of come across as very genuine people that you'd want to hang out with in real life. Yosuke just seems like a really great best friend, the kind of guy who always has your back. Chio does manages to play the tomboy thing with pretty well without coming across as bitchy. Yukiko is I forget what it's called, the something Yamato, the flower of Japanese womanhood, kind of the traditionally feminine Japanese woman, very well. Overall, it's just you have this excellent mix of characters. Naoto, along with Kenji, I'd say are kind of the two more complicated members of the investigation team. Joining your party last, Naoto is kind of seen throughout the story and is a very mysterious figure, but once you kind of get into her past, you find a very fascinating person behind the hat. So while it's left kind of ambiguous or etc. over the course of the game, Naoto is in fact female. Despite that, she dresses as a male, uses male pronouns to describe herself, and doesn't correct people when they think she's a male. And it was kind of interesting because when I heard about the game, people said it was groundbreaking for dealing with transgenderism and dealing with gender identity in a way that Japanese games just don't. And I was like, I don't really want to play this. That sounds like some kind of like just pause. It sounds really unpleasant. But then I actually played the game and I found it was really nothing like what people said. And that's kind of what I'm going to kind of be the focus of this is, well, what Naoto's shadow is, her confusion over her identity. Now, so Naoto comes from a long lineage of detectives going back to she comes from a long line of detectives going back, I think it's to the Meiji era. It might be further back. I always got the impression that her family were nobility of some description or wealthy. I think she has a limo or something to that effect, or a driver. But she always kind of came across as being from kind of a refined, aristocratic or wealthy background. So yeah, so her family is a long line of detectives, and her parents died when she was younger, and she was raised by her grandfather, which caused her kind of like with Nanako to become a lot more mature very quickly, and to kind of deal with her pain, she buried herself in her work. She takes her responsibility as being the last of her family and last in the line of detectives extremely seriously, and puts all of her effort into trying to solve cases. Now, as far as I can determine, Naoto probably has a genius level intellect. And my understanding is IQ is determined by childhood accomplishments. And if I recall, Naoto solved over a dozen cases by the time she was like 15 or 16, which really seems to imply to me her IQ is extremely high, by far the highest among the investigation team and probably the highest in the game. Obviously inspired by Sherlock Holmes, she has a very kind of detached and cold personality isn't exactly fair. I think what you have to understand, the core of Naoto is because she takes the legacy of her family so seriously, and she feels the absolute responsibility to uphold it. The fact that she's a female causes an immense amount of stress to her, because detectives are pretty much all male, and Japan is a very patriarchal society, and being like the only female detective, especially being young, means that none of the police take her seriously. A lot of them make fun of her, etc. And she just has a lot of trouble kind of fitting in. And I think that more than like anything else is kind of what makes her adopt the androgynous appearance, kind of pretending to be male, etc. And it's partially also what makes her so detached and serious. I'm sure that is her personality, that she's naturally a serious person. and has a very strong sense of morality and responsibility. At the same time, though, I think a lot of it is played up by her need to be taken seriously by adults, and so she can't show any degree of childishness or act her age, more or less. So, kind of moving into the whole gender confusion thing. Is Naoto transgendered? No. I really don't get that impression at all. Her desire to be male really doesn't seem to come from any deep mental issue, like some like deep mental illness. It seems to come from a sense of frustration, understandable frustration caused by her being a master detective, being smarter than everybody around her, but not being taken seriously to a certain extent by her gender. So her kind of wanting to be male is kind of more of a practical thing than necessarily a some form of gender dysmorphism or some form of mental illness, as is normally the case. And the game, contrary to what people think, doesn't make this desire seem like a good thing. If you look at her level, it's this disturbing secret lab full of brutal machineries and disgusting surgical instruments. It really doesn't present her desire to kind of be male as anything positive. If anything, the game really, I think, does a good job of showing off just how disturbing the whole phenomena can be. But like I said, I don't really get the impression it comes from that. I think it's just frustration. You also have to keep in mind that Naoto is 15 or 16 years old. People are just crazy at that age. You were crazy at that age. I was crazy at that age. You got all the hormones pumping. It's a time of life where you're very confused. You're very confused. Your emotions are very random. And in some cases, you will just have abnormal or strange reactions as part of growing up. And Naoto is a bit emotionally stunted just because she hasn't really spent much time around people her age or had friends, etc., and her overly serious demeanor tends to push people away. So I see it as a reflection of her, I guess you could say, confusion, a reflection of her insecurities, more than I think anything really transgender in nature. So Naoto is generally considered to be best girl, if not in the Persona series, at least in Persona 4. A lot of male gamers really like her calm personality. Something men really hate that I think a lot of women don't realize is really excitable, bitchy, aggressive behavior for women, just freaking out over things, etc., nagging, that kind of stuff, which Naoto really doesn't display any of. She's just very calm and collected. Also, men like to talk and kind of have intellectual discussions. And the fact that Naoto is probably smarter than you is kind of a big turn on for most guys. The idea of kind of having a girlfriend who's a QT but is also kind of your intellectual equal is very I'm trying to think of how to describe it. It's very appealing to a lot of men to kind of have a true mate who's also their friend, as well as kind of being their lover. And I think to a large extent the fact that Naoto is a QT, Naoto is actually very beautiful. It's just kind of difficult to tell necessarily because of her androgynous appearance, the hat she wears, the fact that her hair is short. But if you see her kind of with her hair grown out, she does look substantially more so. That being said, I actually think her look does suit her. And she's kind of one of the women who could, I think, pull off being handsome very well. She doesn't... It's not necessarily that she looks masculine. It's kind of hard to describe. If you've seen Sailor Moon, Sailor Uranus is kind of similar. And I think Emily Blunt's another person who really, a woman who managed to pull off kind of the being handsome thing successfully. But yeah, so Naoto, it's also kind of endearing that kind of behind her kind of cold exterior, she's very kind of insecure. She's kind of nervous and shy and that kind of thing. And men just find that very attractive in a lot of ways. So I guess it's kind of a combination of her intellect, her personality, and her appearance. For a lot of men, kind of make her best girl and make her kind of the type of woman that a lot of people would go after. Mitsuru is very similar. The two characters both kind of share the not only the absurdly good looks, but kind of the lack of comfort with kind of their gender, being the sole heir to an immense fortune and responsibility, and kind of being cold and distant from those around them. Not out of any sense of arrogance, but just out of a deep sense of responsibility and a desire to uphold their role. So, Naoto's a great character. She kind of is the perfect capstone to the investigation team, is kind of the more mature, rational voice. And she's just a lot of fun to have around. It's interesting because my understanding is she's the only girl who can actually cook pretty well because she just follows the recipe exactly and doesn't experiment. Um, so that's pretty much all I have to say about Naoto. A great character. I'll try to get through most of the Persona 4 characters just because I love the game so much. But I hope you enjoyed the character profile and then more to come.